thought prison would be the end of his story, that after the lies, the murders and the trial, his punishment had finally begun. But what waits for Chris Watts behind those walls is something far darker than death itself. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed for more shocking true crime stories that reveal what really happens when justice is served. But mercy is not. He thought the worst day of his life was the day he stood before the judge. He thought hearing his sentence, 5 life terms, no parole, would be the end of his suffering. But Chris Watts was wrong. His punishment was only beginning. What he's living through now is a reality so suffocating, so endless, that many believe it's worse than death itself. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed for more true crime stories that pull back the curtain on what really happens after the headlines fade. The courtroom had fallen silent that November morning. Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled. A nation that had watched his fake pleas on television now watched him stripped of every ounce of control. Just months earlier, he'd stood in front of those same cameras, begging for help to find his missing family. His wife, Shanann, his 2 little girls, Bella and Celeste. His voice cracked, his eyes darted, but his words, "If you're out there, please come home," were a performance, one the world would soon see through. When the verdict came, there was no drama left, only the sound of the judge's voice echoing through the courtroom. Life without the possibility of parole. Then another, and another. 5 sentences stacked like the walls that would soon surround him forever. Some believed this was mercy compared to what he'd done. Others called it justice stretched thin, but no one could imagine how the years ahead would eat him alive from the inside out. After his sentencing, the Colorado Department of Corrections faced a decision. Where could they put a man like Chris Watts? Someone whose crimes made even hardened inmates sick. Keeping him in Colorado meant almost certain death at the hands of other prisoners. So quietly, without public notice, they moved him hundreds of miles away to a place few ever leave, Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, and that's where his real punishment began. Far from the cameras, behind a steel door that never fully closes or opens, Watts entered a world built not just to confine, but to break. There every second dripped slower than the last. No applause, no shouts, no noise, just silence, the kind that scrapes against the mind. And for a man like him, silence became the cruelest sound of all. Inside Dodge Correctional, Chris Watts woke to a world that felt more like a tomb than a prison. His new reality measured 6 feet by 9, concrete walls, a thin metal bed, a steel toilet, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights that never seemed to rest. The door clanged shut each night, but it didn't matter. Time had already stopped for him. Every morning, a guard's voice echoed down the corridor, announcing breakfast through a slot in the door. The trays slid through, the sound of metal on metal, then silence again. That's how his days began, with no faces, no conversation, just the awareness that he was still breathing when part of him wished he wasn't. For 23 hours every single day, Chris stayed locked in that cell. 1 hour of recreation was his only escape. But even that word was a cruel joke. He spent it alone, surrounded by tall concrete walls and barbed wire, pacing under a gray sky that seemed to press down on him. No other inmates. No contact, just him and his thoughts. Some called it administrative segregation. Most knew it by its truer name, solitary confinement. Human beings weren't made for silence this deep. After months of isolation, even the smallest sounds became distorted. The mind starts to fill the emptiness with its own noise, whispers, echoes, fragments of memory that loop endlessly. Prison psychologists say that after a while, people in isolation begin to lose their sense of time. Days blur together. You forget the difference between yesterday and tomorrow. You forget what real human eyes look like. For Chris, it was more than punishment. It was slow erosion. His thoughts replayed the crimes that led him there. Shanann's final moments, Bella's tiny voice asking, "What's wrong with Mommy?" That question became his prison, replaying on a loop in his head with nowhere to run from it. He wasn't surrounded by guards or bars anymore. He was surrounded by his own memories, his guilt gnawing at him in the dark. No one speaks to him except guards performing routine checks. Even then, the exchanges are mechanical. Name, number, signature. There's no comfort, no warmth, no reminder that he once lived in a world where laughter filled his home. What's left is only the dull rhythm of isolation, a punishment so quiet it screams. As days melted into months, Chris Watts began to understand that death would have been simpler. The mind can't survive in a vacuum, and inside those walls, time wasn't just passing, it was dissolving him. He'd once been a man who smiled on television, played the role of a loving husband, a devoted father. Now his reflection in the scratched metal mirror barely looked human. Pale, hollow-eyed, haunted. In solitary, the silence plays tricks. Sometimes it whispers, other times it roars. The fluorescent light above his bunk buzzed with a low hum that seemed to crawl into his skull. His thoughts became the only voices he heard, and they weren't kind. Each memory replayed in sharp, unrelenting detail. Shanann's laughter echoing through the kitchen, Bella's tiny hand holding his, Celeste running toward him, giggling. They were ghosts now, and they never stopped visiting. Psychologists call this slow psychological decay the punishment of the mind. It's the kind of suffering that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves permanent scars. Prisoners in isolation often begin to hallucinate. They hear footsteps that aren't there, voices behind the walls, or imagine movement in the corner of their vision. Some start pacing for hours, counting the cracks in the floor, creating patterns just to feel like time still exists. For Chris, every moment became a mirror reflecting what he'd destroyed. The guards saw it too, the distant stare, the muttered prayers that had no sound. He began writing letters, sometimes to no one. Apologies that would never reach the people they were meant for. He told interviewers that he prayed every day, that he'd found faith. But faith in solitary confinement is fragile. The silence tests belief, bends it, breaks it. He has no future to plan for, no milestones to count down to. There's no parole board, no someday, just decades of the same morning, the same cell, the same reminder that this is it, forever. Execution would have been an ending. But what he's living is a sentence with no finish line. A kind of waking death that repeats every sunrise. Each time the lights flicker off, the world doesn't go dark for him. The darkness is inside now, permanent patient waiting. Even behind layers of concrete and steel, Chris Watts couldn't escape what he'd become. Not just another inmate, but a symbol of betrayal. In prison, everyone knows his name. The guards know, the inmates whisper it. He's not just serving time. He's living as the most hated man in the room, every room, even when he's alone. In the twisted hierarchy of prison life, there's one unspoken law. You don't harm children. And Watts broke it in the worst possible way. That mark follows him everywhere. He isn't just despised, he's reviled. To the other prisoners, he's the bottom of the pit, the face of everything unforgivable. And though he's kept in protective custody, everyone knows protection is never absolute. One mistake, one door left open, one glance the wrong way, and the consequences could be instant. He lives with that knowledge every single day. Every echo in the corridor could mean danger. Every shuffle of boots might be someone coming for him. He eats alone, walks alone, breathes alone, but fear keeps him company. In a place where violence earns respect, killing a man like Chris Watts would make someone a legend. The guards know this. The prisoners know it too. And so does he. Outside the walls, the world hasn't forgotten him either. Letters still arrive, not words of comfort, but reminders of disgust. People write to tell him he's a monster, to describe in chilling detail what they think should happen to him. Parents who lost children, strangers who saw his fake TV interview. They all reach out, not for connection, but to ensure he never forgets. Every envelope, every word, is another blade twisting inside his conscience, if he still has one left. Then came 2020. A Netflix documentary resurrected the story for a new generation. Millions watched, horrified, as his smiling lies replayed on screen. His name, once a fading headline, became a curse all over again. Even teenagers who hadn't been alive when the crime happened learned his face, his voice, his deception. There's no escape from infamy. No way to outlive the story. For Chris Watts, time doesn't bury the past. It keeps digging it up over and over. And in that endless spotlight, his punishment doesn't fade. It burns brighter. Years have passed since the murders, but for Chris Watts, time has stopped moving. The days may change on a calendar somewhere, but inside that cell, it's always the same morning, the same silence, the same ghosts. And though he's locked away from the world, his story keeps finding its way back into the headlines, not because of what he's doing, but because of what he's already done. In rare interviews from prison, Watts has tried to explain himself. He says he prays every day. He claims to feel remorse. He's written letters to Shanann's family, apologies that sound more like confessions whispered into the void. He talks about how he thinks of his daughters constantly, how he dreams of them, how he wishes he could turn back time. But for many who've seen him speak, there's something missing, something hollow in the way his voice cracks on command. The same way it did when he begged for their return on television. People debate whether he's truly sorry, or if it's just another act in a long performance. Is he grieving for his victims, or for himself? Is his sadness for the lives he ended, or the life he lost? Because remorse without redemption is just memory, and Chris has nothing left to redeem. His fate is sealed, his story written. No matter how many Bible verses he memorizes or apologies he pens, there's no undoing what he did in that Colorado home. And what he did still echoes, especially in the minds of Shanann's family. Her parents wake up every day to a silence that feels heavier than death. They lost their daughter, their granddaughters, and any sense of peace that once lived in their home. Shanann's brother still carries the anger, the disbelief, the question that has no answer. Why? Chris Watts sits in his cell knowing that every sunrise brings pain to people outside those walls because of him. He knows that the world despises him, that no amount of repentance will change that. He knows that Bella's last words, "Daddy, no," will echo longer than any sermon or prayer. And that knowledge, that endless awareness of what can never be undone, might be the cruelest punishment of all. Night comes early in prison. The lights go out, the corridors fall silent, and the world beyond those concrete walls feels impossibly far away. For Chris Watts, it's in those hours, the hours between midnight and morning, that the truth presses hardest. The walls don't just hold him, they speak to him. They whisper reminders of everything he's lost, everything he destroyed. There are no cellmates, no comfort, no escape. The hum of the fluorescent light, the clang of distant metal doors, those are his lullabies now. And sometimes, when the silence stretches too long, he starts to talk. To himself, to God, or to the ghosts of the family he erased. No one answers, of course. They never do, but still he speaks. Because silence, for him, has become unbearable. Some say that Chris has found religion, that he spends his days reading scripture, writing in journals, trying to make sense of the senseless. Others believe it's just another mask, one more layer to hide the monster beneath the man. But deep down, even he must know, no verse, no prayer, no act of faith can erase what he's done. Forgiveness isn't guaranteed. Not from the world, not from the families, and maybe not even from God. Outside, years keep passing. The world forgets, then remembers again. Documentaries resurface, true crime channels retell the story, and the horror of that night returns to millions of screens. Each time it does, the same truth echoes louder. Chris Watts is not dead. But maybe he's not alive either. He exists in a space between the two, a man breathing in a cage built by his own hands. For him, every breath is a reminder, every sunrise a sentence renewed. There's no release waiting at the end of the line, no final chapter that brings peace. Just endless time, stretching on, unbroken, unforgiving. In many ways, death would have been mercy, quick, final, silent. But life in that cell, that's the slow burn. The punishment that never ends. A life where every heartbeat reminds him of what's gone, and of the truth that sometimes living is the cruelest form of justice.